Welcome back, TCS TV viewers. Chris Nichols here from the camera store. Today we're playing with the Olympus OMD E-M1 Mark II, and we're right in the middle of the Alberta cold snap, so I'm going to go inside now. All right, so we're going to forget shooting in the cold today. Jordan and I we've had enough of the cold weather. We're going to take advantage of the classroom central heating, and we're going to talk about the OMD E-M1 Mark II's new feature set. And there is actually a lot of stuff to talk about. I'm excited to play with the camera's handling, the new menu system and whatnot, but tomorrow we actually have a really good test for this because, of course, autofocusing speed and buff rate is one of the huge improvements here. So we're going to get out and shoot a Calgary Flames practice session, and they're, full-on professional NHL team in the Saddle Dome. Very excited to do that. We're going to put the camera through its paces tomorrow too. Now, first impression of just holding the camera in my hand, very, very similar to the E-M1 as far as the look, button layouts, everything's going to be very familiar. The grip is a little bit different though. It's very comfortable, a little bit deeper in the middle section. I think if you have larger hands, you're going to have a good secure feel on there. I love the dial placement as usual. Everything falls exactly where it should. I'm going to take the grip off here just for a moment to show you some stuff. Now, weight on the camera, I like the balance. It's still got a good quality feel. And of course, this is weather sealed and splash proof. It's got a nice weight to it without being overly heavy. But check out this brand new battery. Huge. Look at the size of that. So really big battery, and Olympus is actually rating this at about 400 shots officially, but what we're finding is with our testing, with what a lot of photographers are finding, that they're getting way more shots than 400. I believe it with that large battery. Throw the grip on here, you get a second one in there, and I think you can pretty much shoot all day like an SLR. Now, scanning around the back of the camera, one thing you are going to find that's quite different, we now have a full rotating screen, and of course Jordan and I love this. We still feel that this is the best design. A million dots on there, I mean, not going to blow you away, 3-inch screen. However, the full rotation is fantastic. The EVF, on the other hand, very similar to the E-M1, 2.36 million dots, but we've got an enhanced refresh rate. Normally 60 frames per second, and it is very, very nice to use. I did find that sometimes it would just get a little bit choppy in certain areas, but at 120 frames per second, I haven't noticed anything. Just smooth, 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 very much like an optical viewfinder and a joy to use. Now, going along with the new LCD screen, we've got the usual touch autofocus capability, and it works very, very well. I can touch anywhere on the screen that I want. And when I bring the camera up to my eye with the EVF, I've got good separation so my face isn't touching the screen, and it activates the 2/3 right side of the LCD, so I can use my thumb or finger to move the autofocusing point around. It works very well. It's nice and quick and responsive. I will say that sometimes if I go too far off the right or left, I won't have moved my autofocus point all the way to the right or left. It doesn't quite follow as far as I need it to. But again, I can just move my thumb off the screen, touch it again, and put it where I need it to go. Works pretty well. Last thing that I'm noticing is kind of different here is dual slot. We've got UHS 2 up on top and UHS 1 at the bottom. But by far one of the biggest, I'm going to say, improvements and changes for me using this camera is the new menu system. Now, if you've seen any of my other Olympus reviews, I'm not very friendly about the menu systems, and frankly, I don't like them. I find them confusing, very different from picking up another camera to this one. And I know that if you're an Olympus user and you've used it a long time, you get used to it, but weird iconography, to refer to things like silent mode and different kind of things. This menu system is vastly improved, simplified, cleaned up, and just really, really nice to use. Things like, for example, that as I scroll through pages, I never have more options on this screen beyond that first page, so I never have to feel like, oh, do I need to scroll all the way down and find out if I'm missing anything? The custom settings are all laid out properly. A for autofocus now, B for buttons, C for continuous shooting options. I mean, these are all just simplified and far more intuitive. Now, on top of that, the E-M1 Mark II has been made to be intensely customizable, not just with all the custom buttons. I mean, those are straightforward. You can set them up and basically set almost any option you want for them, but also customizable in terms of the menu controls. I mean, if I had to make a complaint, I would say that it's maybe too much customization. You can literally set anything that you can possibly think of to your heart's content. That being said, I mean, users that are more just enthusiastic about photography, they'll set what they like and leave the rest alone. And if you really want to get technical and make this camera behave exactly how you want to, you have that option here. So everything you could possibly think of, you have a very customizable, very professional platform here. Of course, the other thing that Olympus has always been famous for is inbuilt body stabilization, and of course the E-M1 Mark II is no exception. However, we now have a new system and a lot of cool features. I've got the 12-100 f4 lens on here, and I'm really excited to play with this one as well. But we've got image stabilization now right on the lens, and some of the lenses, like the 300mm f4, are also incorporating this system. Now, what you get here is a combination of both the lens stabilization and the body as well. And I'm saying right now, without any breakfast and drinking 2 cups of coffee, I can pull off about a quarter of a second handheld at about a 200mm equivalent. Now that's pretty good. I think I can do better, but I have to be less shaky. So I think, again, tomorrow I'm gonna have my chances to really explore that and play with it. But overall, really, really impressive. Now you can also just cut the image stabilization right off on the lens, and you can just use it on the body. And of course, you'll get that 5-axis stabilization if you're using lenses that don't have image stabilization as well. You even have a very generous option to support basically like the Panasonic image stabilization in their lenses. So overall, this is a nice improvement, very easy to set up and very customizable. Now, rounding out the E-M1 Mark II, we've got a brand new sensor. It's not the same as the Pen F. We've got a 20 megapixel sensor in here now. It's a new Jpeg 8 software engine as well, and it gives us some nice improvements. We've got the high res shot mode back, and I did like that on the E-M5 Mark II. However, it had some issues. You know, any sort of movement, you get these weird artifacts and strange sort of jagged kind of lines and stuff. Well, now with the Jpeg 8 software inside, we're getting better processing. We're also getting higher resolution, and it can handle small movements. So I've been assured that things like leaves moving or water movement, you know, anything like that should be handled properly, and that's a nice thing to have. Now, we can also get a 25 megapixel JPEG, we can get a 50 megapixel JPEG, and shooting in RAW, we can get 80 megapixels. I definitely want to test that, but you do have an option here with Olympus that you can get higher resolution if you need it, as well as better color information. All right, I think it's time to leave our quick little impromptu studio setting here and go take some shots. I am going to brave the cold for you guys here. We have a lot of unanswered questions on this camera. You know, the autofocus, the buffer. I want to test that tomorrow. And I should also mention that Jordan's going to shoot the entire episode tomorrow when we're out there doing the practice with an E-M1 Mark II, because of course we also want to see what are the big new video improvements. Does this camera really give us what we're looking for as videographers? I also want to see if this new sensor with a lack of low-pass filter is going to give us you know, something appreciably different than some of the other cameras in the lineup. So I think it's time to go shoot. And we'll see you guys out there, and we'll see you guys tomorrow. All right, so we are at the Scotiabank Saddle Dome. I have caught many a Flames game here. Very awesome venue, great access here, and a perfect way to test out the autofocusing capabilities and continuous drive capabilities of the M1 Mark II. Practice is going to start soon. We're going to get in position. We're going to shoot. Certainly with the 100 to 400 Leica, I mean, it's focusing quick with the penny lens. There are some issues here where it is kind of losing focus and stuff. So often I'm kind of being completely out of focus for a few shots and then right back into it. So I'm going to go to the Olympus glass now and see. I mean, it's working well, but in a really tough situation like this, you might want to stick with native glass. So interesting kind of experience here shooting the mechanical shutter. It is very, very stable. Things you have to keep in mind though, so when you're shooting low speed sequential, you're going to get up to basically 10 frames per second, which is what they call low speed at their maximum, but with continuous autofocus the whole time. So if I do that, I am going to get some blackout as, you know, the shutter has to close, camera refocuses, shutter opens up again. If I go into high speed sequential in the mechanical shutter, I'm getting 15 frames per second, super stable, and basically zero blackout. Now, of course, the minute I commit to the shutter, I'm not going to get autofocusing anymore, but excellent when I'm trying to get shots where I know they're going to be coming right around the goal net here. Crazy frame rate, easy to follow the action. Overall, very, very impressive, very minimal blackout time, very much like a professional SLR. All right, so I'm just trying to play with my zone focusing here, just trying to limit where the continuous autofocus can go, like most cameras can. Now, the E-M1 Mark II, we are down to, well, 1, 5, or 9 points. So not bad, but I would actually want like a bigger zone area, maybe like a 21-point zone or something like that. I'm finding this small 9-point zone still very restrictive. It's effectively, with a long lens, a center focusing point.
So I don't have my own mic right now, so I'm just going to talk into Chris's. I'm actually shooting this entire thing in Cinema 4K on the E-M1 Mark II. One thing I got to say here, the punch and focus on this is really wonderful. I'm loving working with it, but let's see how this does for the rest of the day.
You're shaking quite a bit, but the camera looks nice and smooth. All right, so the Flames just finished up their strategy. They're gonna get back into doing their sequences here, and I'm gonna try the Pro Capture mode on the E-M1 Mark II. Now, this basically captures up to 14 shots before I press the shutter. So the idea is, if I see a really sweet, decisive moment, I hit the shutter in time, I should be able to capture that. And I can change different frames per second, and I've got both a low speed and a high speed. Now, in the low speed, I'm up to 18 shots per second. In the high speed, I'm up to 60, which is very impressive, but I don't get autofocus. So if it's a shot where you're trying to get something very specific, like, I don't know, a dart popping a balloon, the high-speed Pro Cap would work because you can manual focus where you want. For sports and action, I'm going to try to capture those decisive moments right now. So I'm not getting a lot of stuff that I love here yet, but you know, just trying to get used to the camera and how it works and how it focuses. And with this Pro Capture that I'm trying, it does work. It does buffer those 14 frames. You do have to keep your focusing. I'm back button focusing, so I'm focusing with my thumb, holding down the shutter halfway to activate the buffer and start the sort of recording process so that I can retain those frames. It works well. I do get those 14 shots that happen right after I then commit to fully pressing the shutter, but your screen frame rate does go way down when you've got it buffering. So, you know, you're back to almost using like an ancient mirrorless trying to follow moving subjects, and that takes a little bit of practice. It's not bad, but you're not going to get that smooth, seamless kind of reaction time. I'm doing the 18 frames per second, and look at the sequence here. We're getting about, oh, I don't know, 4.5 seconds, but as you play it back, it just looks like video there. Look at that. Like, it's insanely quick what you're getting there. It's almost eerie shooting, and there's no noise whatsoever, but you've just burst off like 110 frames in a row. So certainly you can get high speed frames and good buffer rate on this camera. All right, so now I'm trying the high speed silent. We're shooting 60 frames per second. Now, I do get continuous autofocus the whole time until I start shooting. Then the focus is going to stop and lock, but don't feel like you have to manually focus everything at 60 frames per second. And the amount of shots I'm going to get here is just going to be insane. The only downside I can see is you're going to have to clean up so many unwanted photos on the computer afterwards. So I know yesterday we kind of talked about the battery being larger and how much it should shoot, you know, 400 shots or whatever, SEPA ratings, but it's really quite impressive. So I've been shooting now for about 50 minutes. I'm up to 2,300 photos, and I'm at 72% battery on my first charge here. So really incredible battery life. I mean, obviously you can shoot way more than 400 pictures, you know, especially in the situation like this where we're burning off frames so quickly. But I'm very confident. An hour of shooting continuously, only 30% battery loss. That is very, very good out of a mirrorless camera. So basically I shoot in high speed, and I can just basically guarantee that I'm gonna get a shot. So, you know, when we're in a hockey arena like this, of course, you got really good light on the ice, which is where you want it for shooting that. But when you get into the stands and stuff, it's actually quite dark. So we thought, why not do a low light test here? And I want to see just the E-M1 Mark II also compared against the latest and greatest sensor before this, which is you know, largely held to be the Pen F. So we've got a shot here, 6400 on both cameras. You look at these photos, you'll notice a few things. So first off, the E-M1 Mark II not having a low pass filter, you definitely get a sharpness increase. You can see a little bit more detail in the fine textures here. When it comes to the noise, we're actually seeing a very similar noise pattern. The grain, you know, the granular speckles, so to speak, are basically exactly the same on both cameras. However, we are seeing an improvement in the color noise in the shadow areas. So a little bit cleaner blacks, a little bit less work to worry about. It is an improvement, not a huge one, but definitely a move in the right direction. All right, so practice is over. We'd like to actually thank the Calgary Flames Association for letting us come down here and shoot. That was really, really cool experience. And we're going to take a look at the photos. I'm at 61% battery life. I've got 3,040 photos to go through. I don't want to go through 3,040 photos. Ridiculous. Now, Olympus also assures us that this shutter is going to push about 200,000 actuations. Now, you know, shooting mechanical, you'll get there pretty quick. So it's a good thing we got an electric shutter on this thing. Okay, so first off, I just want to remind you folks that Jordan is still shooting on the Olympus OMD E-M1 Mark II, and I just want to talk about my conclusions about the autofocus because that is such a big change on this camera. Very easily, the E-M1 Mark II is the best autofocusing camera that Olympus has made. Huge improvements to buffer speed, shooting capability. The continuous autofocus is very, very effective, but there still are some issues that we are having, so I want to talk about those next. Now, single point autofocus is excellent, no issues there, and actually we found a big improvement in the continuous autofocus capability of the camera, which puts it in heavy contrast to, issues we've had with things like the Pen F. And we were really, really happy about this. I mean, this camera can really continuously autofocus very effectively, but there are some issues. Now, first off, we always like tracking systems. They're very convenient. They mean that you don't have to often go back and forth between single point and continuous autofocus. And unfortunately, the M1 Mark II's one weakness with autofocus is the locking tracking focus. It's not great that way. We find that, even if we tested it, with the hockey players, which is a difficult situation, but even in the store, just with people standing, portraits and stuff, it has a very, big tendency to lose your main target and go to the background or fall onto something else. It just doesn't hold on tenaciously like a lot of the other brands do. And so unfortunately, we found that we had to go back to a more classic system whereby we're continuously autofocusing and choosing a specific point. But we have issues there too. The single point, of course, is fantastic. It's great. You also have your full wide spectrum focus where you can let the camera decide. But when it comes to a dynamic area, a zone of focus, you only have 5 or 9 points. And that's very limiting. Using the 9-point system helps, but I wanted bigger zones. I wanted to be able to fix the focusing area to something like the right quadrant or left quadrant or center quadrant. Hopefully they changed it with firmware, but right now we don't have it. Still, guys, overall, with the buffer rate on this camera, the ability to shoot multiple speeds, having all these different autofocusing systems and having them be much more effective, this is by far Olympus's best sports action and wildlife camera. And when we compare the Olympus autofocusing against the Panasonic G85, speaking of different brands, we're finding, again, very similar. I don't notice much difference. Overall now, we've got really impressive systems to tackle this kind of difficult sports photography. Now, while we're talking about the brand comparisons, I do also just want to take a bit of time to talk about the Olympus Pro Capture mode versus Panasonic's 4K photo mode. Now, pluses for the Olympus on the Pro Cap mode, we're talking full resolution files, and you can even make those RAW files. Now, that's pretty awesome. The only downsides, I would say, 14 frames into the past, to try and capture what you missed, that's okay, and you do have some adjustability with the frame rate, but the Panasonic 4K photo mode is going to give you way more shots to choose from. As well with the Olympus, when you're using Pro Cap mode, it does get choppy as hell, and that can make it very, very difficult to track your action and make sure that you're still following and framing properly. For Panasonic's 4K photo mode, you get full seamless use. You've got many different modes, whether you want to just hold down and burst off like a machine gun or capture the last 2 seconds of action and get 60 frames or even more. It's very, very impressive, but you are stuck with JPEG only and just under that 9 megapixel resolution. Either way, I think the E-M1 Mark II has got an amazing achievement here, not just with the Pro Capture mode, but just the buff rates in general. They are going to blow you away.
Hey guys, it's Jordan, and we're going to talk about video on the OMD E-M1 Mark II. Now, I wasn't expecting great things going into this. Olympus, it always seems like video has been kind of an afterthought for them. But when they announced this guy at Photokina, I looked at the specs and wow, we got Cinema 4K, a high data rate, a headphone jack. It looks like they're actually taking video seriously. And I was really pleasantly surprised when I started shooting on this. Just a few things seem really well thought out. For starters, you can have the entire camera's interface, all your custom buttons, everything set up for video, completely separate from stills. So when I switch over to video, it changes to the flatter profile. My custom buttons will all do different things for me. It's something I've been asking for on cameras for a long time, and I'm shocked that Olympus is the first company to actually implement this. As well, the punch-in magnifier when you're checking your focus is the best I've ever seen on a camera. It is extremely sharp. You know exactly when you're in focus. The only disadvantage is you lose that ability once you start recording. So it's great for setting up your shot. Once you're rolling, though, you are relying on peaking, which thankfully is included. Now, one thing I've always kind of thought is that Olympus has the best stabilization system out there, especially for recording video. And the E-M1 II takes this to a completely different level. And when I started shooting Chris at the hockey rink, I brought a monopod with me. And 2 shots in, I just threw it away. I was getting exactly the same results, just hand holding the camera. So if you're doing some travel shooting or documentary work, it's amazing knowing you can have a camera this compact, no support for it, and you're getting usable footage. Remember to turn it off if you're on a tripod. It's the weirdest feeling to be panning the camera and the frame doesn't move at all. It takes a little while to catch up with you, but if you're shooting handheld, this is the best system I've seen by far. It even seems to do a pretty good job while you're taking steps, which I haven't seen on any other camera system. They've been good. When you're trying to hold it steady, as soon as you move, there's still a lot of movement in the frame. You kind of glide with the E-M1 too, and it's really beautiful. Now as well, I really like how Olympus uses their touchscreen when you're working with the video functions on this. You can set your audio levels, headphone levels very quickly with the touchscreen with a couple quick pokes. I do wish they'd given you that option in the Super Control panel. They seem to give you control over everything else but that. But it's a small issue, honestly. I really like having a touchscreen for this, and it is great for setting an autofocus point. Now, on that same subject, there is a lot I really like with this camera, but I was still let down by the autofocus in video. I think it's just so processor demanding what this camera is doing that the focus system is nowhere near as good in video as it is in continuous autofocus for stills. I found it was hunting quite a bit, drifting, and just nowhere near as fast. Now initially I thought that might just be when we were recording the Cinema 4K with it, but switching over to 1080 I found the exact same issues. So it's similar to Panasonic. In a pinch you can use the autofocus for it, but you've got to know it's not going to be 100%. I would personally manual focus most of the time, especially with that amazing punch-in focus, and the peaking's quite responsive too. Now there's a few things with the E-M1 too that really remind me this is Olympus's first kick at taking video seriously. For starters, they have a flat profile in the camera, which is wonderful, and as I mentioned before, I love that it's back on by default when you switch back to video mode, but it's not a terribly flat profile at all. It really looks like they took their standard profile and just reduced the contrast a little bit. Here you can see the original profile, and here it is with the grade on it. It's not much of a difference at all. I would like to see a more traditional log profile with that. As well, I saw some real weirdness with the data rate. Now, they're saying we're getting 237 megabits per second, and it is possible to get that with a frame full of motion, but your average data rate in Cinema 4K is extremely low. And we're talking anywhere from 40 to 60 megabits per second. Now, in a lot of situations, like me sitting here talking, that's not going to give us any issues, but we did try doing a frame where we've got a static frame and then we add a lot of movement to it, and you can see here we get some compression issues as it tries to suddenly bump the data rate on us with the variable compression rate. So that is something you can run into issues with. Now, as far as low light shooting with this camera, it's pretty good. It's certainly better than the GH4. I'd say it's more in line with like a GX85, something like that. But it is definitely a camera. If you're doing a lot of available light, like event work and stuff like that, probably wouldn't be my first choice. Much better with lit stuff like this, or if you're doing some shooting outside. I would really try and keep this camera under 1600 ISO if you can. One final thing I do want to say, it's kind of odd that we've got Cinema 4K as their highest quality record mode, but no high data rate for shooting 30 or 25 frames per second, or even a lower data rate 24 frame per second in a regular 16:9 aspect ratio. Again, this seems like something that can be added in firmware, but overall I really did enjoy shooting with the Olympus E-M1 Mark II. I can see us using it a lot. It might actually be one of our travel cameras because that stabilizer is so effective. There are some issues, but a lot of them I think Olympus can fix in firmware, and if they're showing this much commitment to video right now, hopefully we'll see that same kind of level of commitment for firmware updates in the future.
So, you know, as a camera reviewer, it's the cameras like the E-M1 Mark II that really surprise us and that we really enjoy, because this is where Olympus has gone and done something quite different from what they're normally used to. And this has got a lot of big changes. First off, though, I still love the design aesthetic. It's retro, but it's compact, and yet they improved the grip so that if you have bigger hands, you're using big lenses for wildlife and sports, it's going to feel very comfortable. On top of that, of course, we've talked about the autofocusing is revolutionary for this camera. The buffer rates are great. They really threw a lot of technology in there as well. I immensely appreciated the revamped menu system. Although the camera is very customizable and those that aren't super tech savvy might get a little intimidated, they made it much easier to navigate. And the video, I mean, Jordan's talked about that quite a bit, but I think overall we were not expecting much, and Olympus really, again, did surprise us with some very interesting technology. You know, technology is really the key. Who is this camera for? We did a lot of the stuff today in this video with indoor sports, and that's still kind of a weakness. You know, Micro Four Thirds, the sensor is still not great in low light, and we're not seeing the big changes that we need to see in sensor technology to make that really improve. But if you're doing any sort of outdoor sports, good light, journalism, wildlife, this camera is going to kick ass. You're going to really enjoy the small weight, but still the ruggedness, the capability, and the autofocusing speeds. You know, if you're really into a lot of tech, you're going to love this camera too. This stabilizer is incredible. It makes handheld shots crazy. It helps with video. It's going to help with long lenses, backpacking, hiking, anything like that where you don't want to drag out a monopod or tripod. This camera is all about technology, and it's about fast shooting capability. And if you're a videographer, well, you're going to like that as well. If you're not shooting in low light, guys, check it out. My only still caveat to all that is it's an expensive camera, and is it worthwhile to everybody? I guess only if you really feel that tech is going to help you out and you really need it for your photography. But that's how they're justifying it. It's a technological camera. Now don't forget, check us out on Instagram, follow us on Twitter, subscribe to our channel, and let us know what you guys think. But I do love how revolutionary this camera is for Olympus, and we always love when manufacturers bring out exciting products. See you guys soon.